Well, good afternoon. Welcome. What a crowd. This is good. This is great stuff. For those of you who have not had a chance, that I haven't had a chance to meet with you, my name is Ryan Mitchell. I'm a private equity M&A partner here in the Dallas office of McGuire Woods. Really want to thank you all for joining us here today. We're absolutely thrilled to host this event again here in Dallas. We've done this for several years, and it's been a lot of fun over the years for sure. I know we have quite a few McGuire Woods attorneys here as well. Some of you traveled all the way from upstairs, and some of you actually came across the country. So, regardless of your path here, we want to thank you for being here and supporting us today. Sorry, that's me. This is a slide I do not want to skip. Our co-sponsors, they are critical to this event. Montgomery, Kosha, Greilich, and Trivista have been fantastic partners on this event with us for several years now. And we absolutely look forward to working with them in the future on events like this. And if we could just get a quick show of hands from the MCG and Trivista folks that are in the room. Okay, great. Well, thank you again. We could not have pulled this off without your support. So a little bit about us. McGuire Woods is one of the few firms with a food and beverage team that provides transactional litigation and regulatory services to the industry. To date, we actually rank among the top 10 law firms in two highly respected league tables, Thomson Reuters and Bloomberg, for the number of U.S. mid-market M&A deals that we've handled for clients, and many of those do fall in the food and beverage space. For the past few years, Chambers has recognized our firm as having one of the best regulatory and litigation practices in the food and beverage space in the country. And just this year, we were named M&A Law Firm of the Year by Mergers and Acquisitions magazine, recognizing, of course, our depth in deal work, but also two initiatives, Women in Private Equity and Finance, and our efforts in the independent sponsor arena. And speaking of that, if you're not aware, we maintain a preeminent independent sponsor practice here at the firm. We recognize the unique opportunity that independent sponsors have or play in finding quality investments that appeal to a wide range of capital providers. And we try to add value to that process to the extent we can by sharing relevant opportunities with members of our network, which is constantly growing. We recently hosted our second annual independent sponsor conference here in Dallas. Hopefully some of you were at that. We had a great turnout. We had over 550 independent sponsors and capital providers there. So it was a lot of fun, a successful event by any metric, and we look forward to growing that, in the years to come. We also lead several independent sponsor networking groups here in Dallas as well as across the country. Those basically are smaller, group settings which facilitate the sharing of best practices, connections, ideas, deal leads, et cetera, and sort of a trusted network of professionals. I'll just put these up. These are a few examples. Our food and beverage attorneys have represented some of the biggest food and beverage manufacturers, distributors, and retailers, and some of the most noteworthy transactions and cases in the industry. We've included a few examples here, and I believe the handout materials that you got, they have a more exhaustive list of those engagements, but in the interest of kind of keeping us on schedule, I won't get too into the weeds on these transactions, but happy to obviously discuss or answer any questions after the program on any of those engagements. We have deep experience in not only defending the biggest international and household brands that we've all heard of, like ConAgra Foods and Smithfield, among others, in high-stakes litigation, but also representing clients such as Miller Coors and others in expanding their businesses and also equally as important, helping them comply with the ever-evolving regulatory landscape. Our food and beverage team leaders are truly some of the industry's most prominent food safety thought leaders. Our attorneys here literally wrote the book on food safety law. Members of our food and beverage team are highly regarded and well-known speakers at industry conferences, and they regularly contribute to publications. They're often called upon to comment on emerging trends in leading industry journals, such as the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, Law 360, Food Safety Magazine, Food Manufacturing Magazine, and others. We regularly host seminars and programs just like this one, focused on key issues facing the industry as well as deal trends in the space that we see. And of course, the goal of these events is just to get a lot of folks in a room, primarily food and beverage executives, entrepreneurs, capital providers, and intermediaries. So thank you all for being a part of that today. So enough about us for the time being. I'm sure you'll hear plenty in the panels later, but I'd now like to introduce today's keynote speaker, Marty Ellen. We're very excited to have Marty be involved here today. I know you're going to love his presentation. He's got an amazing pedigree, and just a little bit about his background for those of you who have not yet had a chance to meet him. So Marty retired as the Executive Vice President and CFO of Dr. Pepper Snapple Group just in July of this year, but not before he helped or played a major role, I should say, in the negotiation of the $21 billion sale of Dr. Pepper Snapple to JAB Holdings. Marty had been with Dr. Pepper since 2010, at the time when it was spun off from Cadbury, and the market cap in 2010 was about $8 billion. So that's pretty good success by any measure. So congratulations. In 2017, Marty was ranked the leading CFO in the beverage and household products category by the sell-side analysts that cover companies in that space. Besides finance and IT, Marty directed the strategy and innovation process teams at Dr. Pepper, including managing the relationships with their joint venture brand partners. Marty's been a CFO for 29 years across many verticals, including healthcare, industrial, franchising, and consumer businesses, both public and private. Marty's companies have been sold 6 times over the years, with Marty serving as a principal negotiator in each of those transactions. Also, across his career, he's been engaged in about $10 billion, with a B, worth of buy-side M&A transactions, and he's played a critical role in the post-closing integration of those target products and entities. So without further ado, please give a warm welcome to Marty Ellen. Thanks, everyone.
I need this. Ryan, thank you. Can you guys all hear me? Thanks for having me this afternoon. As Ryan said, I did retire. I hate that word. Didn't plan for it to happen that way, but the price was good enough. Which is what you do in public companies as a fiduciary for your stockholders. I told somebody, when you retire after July 10th was the first time in 43 years I did not have an office to call my own. And Ryan and Christian originally put this idea that I'd come here and be part of this panel. If you've ever been on a panel, you don't have to do any work, prep work. Oh, they send you 5 questions, beforehand. Then they pivoted on me to keynote. Well, wait a minute. Keynote, you actually have to have something to talk about. And so I actually have a little script here. See, I wrote this myself. This is the first time in 43 years. Well, not 43 years, but the better part of the last 29 years, I actually had to do some original work myself. So we'll see how this goes. And actually, I'll put up a few slides here. And I did lean on. That's the word I use. I did lean on the Credit Suisse consumer and M&A teams to just put some data up here, because I figured they made a lot of money on a $21 billion deal. So they ought to do something in return. So anyway, thanks for having me here. And Ryan covered my background. I've been around, over a cup of coffee sometime, if anybody's interested. I think the fascinating thing about the recent transaction with Keurig and JB, JB took Keurig private in 2016 at a 78% premium. They liked the coffee occasion. They own Pete's and Krispy Kreme and Einstein Bagels and Panera, and they wanted to get into the broader beverage space. And really, to do that effectively, you need a DSD distribution system first and foremost. We were the 3rd largest behind Red and Blue. And so they came after us and put this idea in our head back in 2017. I'll only say, when I tell the story, it's too long a story to go through here, that I turned down a meeting with Jamie Dimon. And I'm convinced that my not going to that meeting last minute got us another $1 billion. I'll let you think about that. As Ryan said, one of the great challenges and opportunities I had at Dr. Pepper was to work with, we call them allied brands, our joint venture brand partners. And it was our way of saying strategically, for us to grow and be in the on-trend categories, it's going to be really hard, if not impossible, to do by ourselves through our own innovation. I think that's not news. I would make that statement pretty much about most of the mature and clearly, I don't know the private world so well, but clearly the publicly traded, we'll call it CPG companies and beverages. And that's why I think I'll go through my comments in a minute. We'll show some data why I think it's, for those of you here who are entrepreneurs And in startup businesses, I think it's never been a better time to be doing what you're doing if you want to monetize those, which you all do. And, for those of you as advisors and equity players and capital partners, same thing. I mean, I think it's a really good space to be in. So with that said, and the brands I just want to throw the partnership brands that I had relationships with and had some responsibility for. You'll know some of these: Vita Coco in the coconut water space, Bai in the functional water space. We ultimately bought that brand. Body Armor recently acquired by Coke. Core Water recently acquired by KDP. Neuro, sort of a crazy brand, and a few others. But it was a strategy that worked really well for us. So I've sort of already. Let me get rid of this. So while you're looking at that, there's a lot of stuff on this slide. As I just said, I think it's never been better to be an entrepreneur in food and beverage. And I also think for those of you in the PE world, keep an eye out, because the larger CPG companies themselves are going to need to reshape their portfolios, and there are some good brands in there that somebody might be able to feast on at some point. Clearly, things are happening. I'm not going to tell you anything you don't already know. Lots of change with the consumer, with retailers creating headwinds for some and actually tailwinds for others. Clearly, consumers are differentiating what they want to eat and drink and how they want to shop. And quite frankly, reading ingredient panels is now taught in grade school. For those of you who have children, you probably know this. In the beverage space, actually, safety concerns around artificial sweeteners are actually causing them to not perform as well as fully sugared, highly caloric soft drinks. And for you moms, I'm not a shopper. In our industry, we talk about mom as the shopper. The shopper is different than the consumer. Think about 100% juices. Apple juice, orange juice. These beverages have no added sugar, but they do have sugar from the fruit. And many moms today are even shunning too much consumption of 100% juices, or apple juice is commonly diluted. We own the Mott's brand. In 2010, we thought of all the brands we have that might have some headway to it, that could give us a little more growth than carbonated soft drink, we thought it would be Mott's. And that whole juice category just turned down. And clearly, ingredients are a concern, whether they're produced organically, naturally, genetically modified. Consumers are concerned and want to eat and drink certain kinds of ingredients. Packaging formats and sizes have been expanded to meet consumer lifestyle occasions, which of course adds increased complexity, and complexity is can be code for cost in the supply chain, and for the retailers in the allocation and optimization of shelf space. So we got a proliferation of different package types for different occasions. Think about digital technology, and we all know this, but we can be targeted now actually while we're shopping. And e-commerce. Think about the impact that e-commerce, by creating the virtual shelf, now allowing startup brands, think about this, to compete on that virtual shelf next to these mature brands that these brand owners have spent hundreds of millions of dollars creating the brand equity. And today a startup can be right there. The first page in the search gets 95% of the hits or something like that, can be right there. Those brands would have never been in a brick and mortar retail shelf, okay, at their stage of evolution. And when I put these remarks together, I recalled my days. I was a CFO of a conglomerate. We owned a bunch of Pepsi bottling businesses. So we weren't the brand owner, but I remember 2 brands, Pepsi and Mountain Dew, 2 packages, cans and 2 liters, put on a truck. And if you were driving to Walmart, you loaded out the truck, either 2,000 or 2,200 cases. And let's see, we advertised on traditional TV and radio And then I don't, maybe it still exists. And then there were the Sunday ads, right? Coke had a 26-week schedule. Pepsi had a 26-week schedule. Whoever was on sale, because that was what? That was the traffic driver to the retail store, to the grocery store. And at that time, I think the retail value of the NARTD, non-alcoholic ready-to-drink category, was in excess of $100 billion in retail, and soft drinks were the 800-pound gorilla. And today, carbonated soft drinks, and I don't want to overly emphasize carbonated soft drinks in this talk today, but they're clearly less than half. I only will say, when I go back to Dr. Pepper Snap, I think one of the most fascinating things about what we were able to do in terms of driving value was everything we did against a declining CSD space, which were still 80% of our sales. So the actual market cap was $8 billion when I got here, but it was $6 billion when they spun out a year before. $21 billion 10 years later, and 80% of our sales coming from carbonated soft drinks, and we beat Red and Blue in the marketplace, IRI and Nielsen data. I think our team has a lot to be proud of. Okay, so given all this change, the consumer, the retailers, you got a lot of what I call stuck companies. You know them. I mean, they're publicly traded. They're in all sorts of CPG spaces, not just beverages. And while they all try to innovate, and we'll talk about innovation, very few, almost if any, can actually do it successfully for, I think, a number of reasons. First of all, the DNA. Some of you here must be entrepreneurs or have started up businesses. The DNA of the people in these larger companies is just, I say, not constructed right. And the mindset in public companies today, which I think has gotten actually a lot worse, is that they can't afford or are afraid of what I'll call the market punishing hits to their stock price associated with the upfront investment to innovate. I had an expression at Dr. Pepper, it's hard to innovate through your P&L in the short term when you're a public company. And I'm a believer that, right wins, that logic wins. And we launched a bunch of innovation a number of years ago. And I said I got on a conference call. I can't remember. It was the 10. You've seen Dr. Pepper 10, Sunkist. This idea of 10 calories regular tasting at the time, the consumer data said that's where we ought to be. I said we were going to spend. Now you guys know we're $1.2 billion of operating profit. Okay, and we're going to spend another $30 million on marketing to launch these 100-year-old brands. These are not new brands. This is not a major initiative, in terms of investment. And we got our heads handed to us. CEOs are too risk averse. Same sort of thing. The investment risk aversion. Time horizons are way too short. And quite frankly, when you get into the operating parts of the organization, it's just too hard to get people to focus on initiatives that just don't move the needle in a big way now. You're selling 500 million cases of Dr. Pepper. What do you want me to do? You want me to grow this thing over here? Maybe we'll sell, 100,000 cases this year. And how much time and effort you want me to put into that? Tell me this again. And I'm measuring my cost per case, down to pennies to 3 decimal places. And what do you want me to do? It's hard. You can say it's the right thing to do strategically, but it's hard. And it's easier for startups to achieve early success at the same time. Right? So you got the big companies don't feel they can do it. You got people in this room, I'm sure, who see the same opportunities. You see the consumer changing. You see the retailers changing. You see the technology implications. And quite frankly, what's good about food and beverage? Barriers to entry are low. That's why you all do what you do. Because if they were high, you'd have a problem. Consumers are shifting and retailers are looking for new ideas. Contract manufacturing, at least in my space, is available for most products and package types. And as I said, the virtual shelf sort of levels the playing field at retail. And so, how do the big companies, how are they going to find the opportunities to grow? They're going to acquire. They're going to acquire I'll say early stage brands that have shown that they have some legs. Depending upon their risk tolerance, they can decide how early or late they want to get into a brand. Our strategy at Dr. Pepper was to, a simple textbook 101 strategy. We got a big distribution system. We'll put your brands on our trucks. We'll bring our DSD, our R&D, our shopper marketing, retailer relationships, etc., all the things we do every day and have, millions of people to do. And in return, we'll take anywhere from 5 to 15% equity in the business. And we'll agree that if our role is distribution, we'll make that earned equity, say over 3 years. We'll set up some distribution goals. The common one is ACV, all commodity volume, which we can, see. We publish data. And we'll set some goals, and we'll take our equity on that basis. And we grew that to $500 million. The collection of brands I referred to earlier, we grew that to $500 million in sales, growing double digits. The strategy worked well. It's having some issues now because of the change of control and change of control consent provisions in a number of those agreements, which we understood and didn't think it would be an issue for us. Okay. So let me just move to. I've only got a couple slides here. You can again. But I'm not gonna spend too much time on this. Many of you know that the mature, high brand equity, low growth, cash flow companies have been trading like bonds, and that's sort of the capital markets view. Rates have been low for a long time. That helped them. Rates are changing now, and they've backed up a little bit. The whole point of all this, though, is that their profile is high cash flow, relatively unlevered, and they need growth. And yet, so you could fill the next box in, why don't you go buy something? I will tell you, deploying capital to acquisitions by a number of these companies is met with huge investor skepticism. Okay? So it's sort of fun. It's a paradox. And I think, quite frankly, I when I would go meet an investor for the first time at Dr. Pepper, I said, before you start asking me all these questions about our business, let's get something straight here. Let me tell you what our business model sort of is built on in terms of TSR, and it's a cash flow distribution model and share repurchase and dividends. And let me tell you how we're going to perpetuate that through 2 to 3% growth a year organically. And by the way, if that doesn't fit, and we'll get roughly a double-digit TSR, maybe high single digits. And if that doesn't fit your investment profile, we should end the meeting right now, because all we're going to do is argue for the next hour. Okay, so but that's the paradox they're in. They could buy things. They're punished for doing it. And I think if you look at this chart, and I'm not familiar with all the transactions here, but clearly I'm familiar enough to know that, and here, sort of the stated strategic rationale. Need to enhance growth, shift portfolio, shareholder activism. I believe there will be more. I've actually just talked to one. Are most likely underpinned by all the factors, all the macro factors I've been talking about, all the challenges that those macro factors have created for these companies. Now, I know this is an eye chart. So just look at the EBITDA multiple column there on the right. And you can form your own conclusion on these values. Many of them are driven by the headwinds that these companies believe they have. I will tell you that some of the larger multiples you'll see on there, I would pick on General Mills, Kellogg's, and Campbell's, particularly. I know those deals. And I'll tell you, in the beverage space, the most important precedent transaction is not shown here because it happened in 2007. And it was Coca-Cola's acquisition of a company called Glasso. Glasso was the parent company for Vitamin Water and Smart Water. And Coke, I know Mike Rapoli really well. Mike was one of the large shareholders in Vitamin Water. He actually told me, he said, we thought they were going to offer us like $2.5 billion. And 4.2 comes out of their mouth or something. I mean, it's like amazing, okay? But anyway, the valuation was 6 times, any accountants in the room here, 6 times gross sales, which I estimate is 9 times what most of us would consider GAAP net sales. And the difference is Gross sales excludes all your price discounting and all your promotional spend. They sort of view it as marketing dollars. That's not marketing. And those of us that have been in this world know that it's all net sales reduction. Okay, so I figure about 9 times net sales. And if you think, by the way, that when they paid 6 times gross, that was because the margins were very high, the company was barely profitable, I believe. But they had generated they had generated a market position, and so that's okay. They reinvested. Okay, that's what you got. You got to get to a certain market position. It's important for shelf space and lots of reasons. And maybe I swagged it. I think $1 billion of the $4.2 billion was the present value of the tax benefit for the 15-year amortization of the purchase price. But it's still a high price, and not sure anybody believes this thing really worked out well for Coke. The point of all this is, everybody I meet in the beverage industry will tell me their company is worth 6 times gross sales. And whenever they tell me their sales, is it gross or net? Okay, because then we send an army of accountants in to go try to figure out what the net sales number really is going to look like if we were to acquire something. But everybody thinks, it's amazing. I travel, I go to all these shows. I don't now, but it's amazing. Everybody's got the same pricing algorithm in their head for beverages, and that it all goes back to Coke and Glass Soap. And look, in 2016, we bought the Buy brand. It was in our portfolio. We paid $1.7 billion. I can tell you the tax benefits were $400 million. So we paid $1.3 billion for the cash flows of the business. I think still a high multiple, but we thought it was the right thing to do because we thought it was a brand that had great legs and lots of innovation opportunity. And we would have lost it. And we just thought if we were going to make a bet on anything, that was the brand to bet on. You saw Coke just doing a deal with Micropoli again on body armor. Lance Collins, the founder of Core Water and Core Organics, he went to KDP and constructed a deal for himself there. And so all this is going to continue. All this just, I think Pepsi might have, I don't know, this is not inside information. I wouldn't share it even if I had it. And so I think Vita Coco and the coconut water, I think they were circling around there for a while. So you can just see that companies are going to continue to look for opportunities to grow, much of which we can put into this arena of, call it, I don't know, outsourced innovation, but it is what it is. Look, I just think this will continue for all the reasons we've said. I think shareholder activism is going to be a continued catalyst for change. I can tell you these companies every day are looking at their portfolios, trying to figure out how they should alter them and what the options are to alter them. I've heard a lot of discussions, and people get into this whole area of, I've got brands I don't want, but I have no tax basis. I can't sell them. I still can't get the multiple that we're trading at. All you guys have heard all that. But there's a lot of head scratching going on to figure out what they should hold and whether some of these companies should get smaller or not. So anyway, that's all I have to, I think. Yeah, that's all I have to share with you. I'm happy to have done this. Like I said, I think it's a great time to be in the space if you're particularly trying to capture those consumer and retail changes. I think there's a lot of opportunity. And I'll take any comments or questions, or I'll get out of here. Okay.
One question.
Yeah.
In your years of serving as CFO, what was the one memory you have that's really interesting?
At Dr. Pepper, I got to tell you, working on this transaction, there's an interesting dynamic in a public company that goes on. So this deal went on for 5 months. Our shareholders were paid $103.75 in cash and got 13% of the combined company. We started at $66 in cash. And I can tell you that there's just a certain dynamic that amongst the board that I felt like when we got it, we're in the upper 90s. I felt like, they were sort of saying, hey, good enough. The bankers, let's not screw this up, Marty. Okay? We got a $50 million fee riding on this thing. Let's not screw it up now. CEO is a great friend of mine. I am here for him. We have a past life together. I love him. He's at whatever, 90 some bucks. What am I worth? Good enough. And I said, that's all well and good, but I haven't heard no yet. Okay? I've seen a lot of theatrics, but I haven't heard no. And then they tried to, I think, box me in this Jamie Dimon meeting, because once I go to Jamie's office, I'm sort of acquiescing and to the numbers that he's looking at. His credit people looked at it. This is a social meeting. And last minute, I said I wasn't going. Our CEO said, you're gonna screw this whole deal up. I said, I'm not going, Larry. I told him why. And then the bankers, and then I said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to let them have their meeting with Jamie. I hope Jamie loves the deal, and then we're going to count tonight. Let him go tell Jamie the numbers he saw were no good. And so it was fun. It was fun. But I'll tell you, I think at Dr. Pepper, I love the people there. I love the business there. I love what we did. I told you, and I told you I had an activist fund reach out to me recently. I'm not going to tell you who they are, what they're working on. It's all public. And they said the one thing they really liked about, they never knew me before, but liked about the results of Dr. Pepper, having looked at the company and how we performed. A lot of companies that have to talk publicly about the results, they use consumer headwinds like companies use the weather. Well, we had a bad weather this quarter, okay? And we never did that. Okay, and we just said, look, we know where the opportunities are. We're going to go after them. We're not going to. I got to take too much time. We're not going to try to extend our brands. I'll leave it this off. To extend our brands in places where the consumer has told us they don't belong. And that's my way of saying there are brands, and then there are names that you can put on something. Decide whether you have a name or you have a brand. Okay, thanks.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
You said that about 80% of the business of Pepper remains in your core legacy brand. But over many years, this has continued. You did very well with that. And yet, on the other hand, we see so much innovation going on in the other 20%. But the big prize is in the 80. Can you comment on that?
That's the challenge. That position, you'll never see, I don't know if they change their mind, you will never see a better for you Dr. Pepper. That's not, most brands need to, there's sort of cash cows, okay? You need to sort of position them. So you're very mindful of the investment you make in those brands, because that cash flow can support a lot of other things. Big part was our distribution model for Charles. But these partnership brands that we grew to $500 million at a time, let's say our sales were $6 billion. Let's call 10%. Well, if we can get 10% growing 20%, that's 2% of the whole. And all we're trying to do is get like 2-3% top line growth, because we sort of got 2-3% top line CAGR over 10 years, and then expanded our margins at a CAGR rate of 5%. Okay? So, you just can't dive in. And how do you get there? We were criticized, the analysts criticized, if you're going to develop these brands, you're going to incubate these brands, and all that's going to happen is they're going to be successful. Listen, Coke's a $200 billion market cap company. Pepsi's a $150 billion market cap company. Times are a $10 billion market cap company. We're peanuts. So they have big checkbooks. They will come and they will take these away from you. Okay? What's your point? I had someone once tell me, oh, Marty, so since those cash flows aren't necessarily perpetual, how should we think about valuing them? I said, you do your job and I'll do mine. Okay, I just looked at the strategy was you figure out what's worth. And we knew that risk. And so what's the answer? Don't do it at all. And we were pretty convinced that if we did a good job, they would be unlikely to want to write too big a check because, as I said, let me pass deals and let the bad taste in people's eyes. And we had equity, and we had buyouts of the distribution. So on top of the equity, to pull the business to another system, we got 2 or 3 years worth of profit per case for every case we sold. I'm done, Chris. I'm done. Good.
All right. Well, that was fantastic. So I really appreciate our keynote speaker for his presentation. We're going to have a panel discussion here now. And first of all, my name is Trent Taylor. I'm a partner with McGuire Woods in the Richmond, Virginia office, a member of the food and beverage team. I do a lot of class action food and beverage labeling work, litigation related to food safety, as well as compliance reviews and risk assessments for various food and beverage products. And I'm going to be the moderator here today. Jim Neal was originally going to be on this panel, and he apologizes for not being able to be here, but he has a trial about to start for one of our food and beverage clients in North Carolina right now. So he sends his regrets. So our topic here today is due diligence in an area of increased oversight. And we're very fortunate to have a great panel here today with two experts on these types of issues. First of all, we have Jennifer Frankenberg, who is a Vice President and Director of Food and Beverage with Trivista. And next we have Paula Piontuk. Did I get that right?
You did.
Okay. I've been working on getting her last name right. And she is the president of Product Recall Prevention Services. And what I'd like to do, first of all, is ask each of them if they could just introduce themselves and give a little bit about their background before we get into the actual questions. Jennifer, do you want to start?
Sure. So I've been with Trivista for about 4.5 years now. We're an operations consulting firm. We work primarily with private equity and their portfolio companies, doing both diligence work in identifying potential gaps in their operations that can be improved upon and improve EBITDA. And we also do the follow-up work, post-diligence. We've got supply chain footprint and continuous improvement groups. My background started with the Kroger Company. I worked there for 10 years. I started off in regulatory affairs, and I moved through to marketing. I worked in procurement. I did a lot of transportation work. You name it, I covered it. When I left Kroger, I started a company, a food safety consulting company, with another gentleman who had retired from Kroger, and did that until Trivista and I found each other. So I've got a lot of expertise in the food and beverage industry.
And I'm Paula Piontek. I have a background in food science from UW-Madison and spent the next 30-some years in the food and beverage industry, working with large companies like Heinz to restaurants like Applebee's and then some of the smaller privately owned firms that you probably are interested in buying. But through my career, I then went into consulting, working with underwriters who sell product recall insurance to many companies and provide the consulting, the crisis consulting services and areas of expertise to review and assess any gaps as they write those policies to see if there's something that might be of risk that we might be able to work with those clients to put a mitigation plan in place to assess the programs and get them to a best practice standard.
All right. So here's how we're going to do this. I'm going to ask our panelists some questions, which we have not collaborated on at all. They have no idea what I'm about to ask them. But we want this to be a dialogue. So if you have questions as we're going through this, don't feel like you need to wait to the end. Just raise your hand, and as soon as we get to a good spot, we'll have you go ahead and ask your question. Because we really do want this to be a conversation with you all. So with regard to the first question, Jennifer, let me ask you this. When conducting due diligence, I know one of the big issues is food safety, and we saw that yesterday when the FDA just issued new guidance on mandatory recalls. So one of the questions, I guess, is what is the best way to uncover food safety considerations when you're doing due diligence, whether it's on the buy side or the sell side?
Okay. Well, one of the things that's very interesting right now is that if you go to FDA's website and you look up the primary reasons why companies are cited in the food industry, the first three list off things like sanitation practices, pest control, and facility conditions, which everybody's mindset is really focused on FSMA, when in actuality, citations related to FSMA noncompliance are really number 4 on that list, which I think is really interesting. And one of the things that I always say is you really need to walk into these facilities and look around. My thing is always look up. Everybody looks across and down, but very few people look up, and that will actually tell you a lot about that facility, how they're managing it, and what their sanitation practices are.
Paul, anything you have?
The only other area I think that gets forgotten is it's not just the facility, but it's what are those preventive maintenance programs. It's the condition of the equipment and looking where are things falling apart, are they shiny like new, because that says a lot about the care and programs that they have in place if they're doing the right things.
And one of the things that I like to do is I really like to look at folks' recall plans. And we actually prepare recall plans for some of our clients. And I think you can really tell a lot about an entity with what kind of recall plan they have. Is it robust? Has there been a lot of thought put into it? Or is it something that was just sort of slapped together? So I think it's important to look at that. I think it's also important to look at the recall history of an entity and what kinds of product recalls they have had in the past. Not just that, but also how they dealt with it. Was it something that they were able to quickly and easily put behind them, or was it something that became a real problem and a real challenge? And as well, if it's something where they had repeated issues over and over and over again, or whether once they had one particular problem, they learned from that and they moved on.
One of the interesting points, though, is a lot of times I'll walk into companies and they say, well, we've never had a recall. Yeah, we've got a safe product, never had an issue before. And I think that's a good point, getting back to the recall program. You always have to be prepared. Things will take you by surprise. And so you need to have that plan in place. And one more thing, because I know Paula will probably jump in on this too, is Trent and I were talking about the recent guidance that just came out yesterday from FDA on mandatory recalls. And I just happened to hear from another consultant today who was commenting on the fact that a lot of times FDA decides, well, we don't really know the origination source of this outbreak. We think it's you, so we're going to make you recall your products. We don't know what to expect right now. So having a good recall program in place is critical. And I highly recommend having a food scientist or a consultant on call, so that if you get that call from FDA, you get on the phone with that person and go, we need help.
And so to add to the recall mandate, what's going on today within the regulatory agencies is they've got a pool of data that they've been collecting over 20-some years. So they have fingerprints that they can match to a specific facility. And when CDC decides they start seeing outbreaks like the lettuce and some of the produce, it was recently the Duncan Hines, right?
Yes,
Cake mix. They can match those fingerprints with something in their database. And that's how they can say whether you have the results or not, that at one point in time, that facility has a match to that illness and outbreak. So they're very good at being able to bring that to your attention very quickly, because again, their goal is to keep safe food in the marketplace. And my only other point on a recall is not just to have it and have it in a binder, but did they bring somebody in to challenge them? I work with McGuire Woods and their PR side of things as well, and we go in and do drills with that senior management team. Are they prepared to take the calls? What kinds of questions are they ready to answer with the media or even their supply chain? And sometimes, companies that think they have it in a book and haven't had to use it because they've had little issues they could get by with aren't going to make it these days with the way social media reacts and how quickly they react to a situation.
All right, well, let me ask a different question, Paul. And and I'm going to direct this question to you. Even for the best due diligence, sometimes misses things. What are some of the gaps that you find or that you see when doing a due diligence assessment?
I think a lot of it has to do with the strength of their food safety team. That demonstrates a commitment. A lot of times they have individuals who have grown up in the organization that may not have that level of experience outside of that facility. They understand the basic principles, but maybe not the science behind it. And to go with that, a lot of times they're not going through effective sanitation programs. They've been doing the same thing for many years. It's been good. They're not doing the environmental testing to show that's like, do what I say what I do, and be able to prove it with their records. And I think those are some of the bigger failures that I see when going through facilities.
And I think the point is, it may look clean and shiny. That doesn't mean that, from a microbiological perspective, that it truly is. And one of the things that we've started doing recently at Trivista is when we go in and do our food safety diligence, we're actually taking swabs, not for pathogens, because that would create some legal issues and regulatory issues, but we swab for plate counts. And that tells us how effective their sanitation program is. If we're getting high counts, we say, look, it looks clean and shiny. You guys are wiping it down, but maybe you're not using the right chemicals. Maybe you're not doing it often enough, but it's not effective.
And one other thing I'll add, one of the things that I've seen, and y'all please comment on this if you are able, is looking down the supply chain. I think lots of times folks maybe just look at the targets, but I think it's important to look beyond that and look at the entire supply chain to get a full sense of the potential risk and look to see whether or not some of these entities in the supply chain have had problems in the past with lots and lots of recalls, that kind of thing.
To go on that side as well, it's what are those agreements in place? Are there written agreements, or is it something that's just historical between the companies? Because that goes a long way. And what are those commitments and responsibilities if there were something to be a failure in the supply chain?
And that's a great point, Paul, and that's something as a litigator that I see all the time. I'll have clients and I'll say, what are the contractual obligations that you have with this particular supplier? And they'll say, well, we signed an agreement with them 15 years ago, and there's nothing current, and it ran out 10 years ago. I see it all the time, and it creates a huge amount of problems on indemnity and sort of side litigation that you have to deal with. So that's a really good point, Paulo. Jennifer, let me turn to you next and ask you a question. I know that there's been a greater focus on food fraud as of late. It's something that I've seen on the litigation side as well. I'm seeing a lot of lawsuits where folks go out, the plaintiff's counsel go out, and they'll test products in the lab and say, oh, you don't have enough pork in this particular product, or you say that you have this but you don't. Are you seeing gaps in how food operations are addressing intentional adulteration?
Yes, a lot of food firms just don't even know how to approach this subject. And part of the problem is there's not a lot of information out there. There's no definitive resource necessarily that you can go to and say, oh, here's the specific things that you need to watch out for. It really is a process of conducting a risk assessment internally. You know what's happened in the past. Juice has been diluted. Fish is out there being sold as something it's not. You've got, horse meat in beef. There's all these things you've heard about. Now, how can you apply similar concepts to the ingredients that you're sourcing? And what are your supply chain controls? It's not even just the fact you don't have contracts with them, but you say, well, I get a letter of guarantee, so they promise their food is okay, so we're good. But that's not the case. And oftentimes your supplier doesn't even have full traceability to the original source of that product. So it takes diligence. It takes thought process. It takes time to work through this. And I think companies know that they need to address it, but they don't even know where to begin.
Paul, anything you want to add on that?
I think just following the world markets is important because we see trends, like you mentioned, the horse meat, but honey or olive oils, a lot of these areas where fraud is existing, where it's not really the 100% or whatever accurate amount that they're stating it is. And if you're buying those types of components, then you have a responsibility to make sure they are what they say they are.
And the other side of it, too, is not just food fraud, but intentional adulteration inside your plant. And that's something that food defense programs need to address, and oftentimes they don't. We think more about strangers walking into a food facility and contaminating product, and we think less about our own employees and what they could potentially do. There needs to be some sort of focus on that. You know, tell the other employees, have you seen anything amongst your coworkers that, you know, raises any red flags? It's perfectly fair to somebody to come forward and say, yeah, there's something strange going on. I'm not really sure what it is, but I wanted to tell you about it.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. And one of the things that we see, you know, I mentioned that we do sort of risk assessments for clients. And sometimes if they're doing a formulation change for a product, they'll come to us and say, what are the risks here? Is there a potential for some type of lawsuit? Generally, but I focus on to a great extent, as well as regulatory enforcement. If they come after us, if we change this particular aspect of the product, this particular ingredient, and we sort of do a comprehensive view at the analysis of the labeling as well as the processes to make sure that they're doing things right and to try to minimize the risk as much as possible.
The other thing, too, I wanted to bring up related to supply chain specifically is we are seeing more and more innovative ingredients and produce from other countries that, we're not familiar with in the U.S. And we're not really considering the risks related to those. For example, if you're looking at produce, from we'll just throw out India, for example. Do you know if there's going to be heavy metals in this? Are you doing testing? Where are your validations and what's the risk assessment being applied to this?
Exactly. And, it's one of those things where if they're not doing the lab tests, you're probably going to have either a competitor or a plaintiff's counsel out there. Yep. They're doing the lab testing, and then all of a sudden you get a notice letter from them.
I would just add on the side of food fraud and knowing food defense, really, I had a case a few years ago where a company was acquired, a smaller company was acquired by a large, and their employees were disgruntled, and they decided they would take action on their own to try to harm the brand name and reputation. So they were putting products into the packages that went out to the public, and over a period of 6 months, it raised a number of complaints about what was happening and where could this be happening within their facilities. So, where are the cameras? Who's aware of, and what kind of action are you taking with these individuals in terms of identifying that risk before it becomes a problem and could hurt your brand?
All right, let me turn to a slightly different topic. And Paula, let me direct this question to you first. We all know that the regulatory landscape in the food and beverage industry is changing literally day by day, as we saw yesterday with the FDA issuing that new guidance. What are some of the current trends in regulatory compliance in the food and beverage manufacturing space?
A lot of it goes after the labeling claims and making, any type of claim on your product that you have to be able to back it up with science and evidence. They're also treating, like I mentioned, the database, they're treating not ready to eat products as if they're ready to eat. It's no longer okay if you have cooking instructions that say you're going to kill whatever bacteria might be in there. You have to take into consideration how is that product going to be used. The frozen vegetables that are used in a salad or a salsa, you say they have to be cooked, but people are using them without cooking them. So therefore, you have to treat that as it's a ready to eat. So if a regulator comes in and says, I tested in an area close to that product contact zone outside of a piece of equipment and they find listeria, you potentially are forcing a recall, a class 1 recall. So they're becoming more and more vigilant in that respect.
It's interesting that I think in the beginning, too, they weren't focusing as much on the documentation, which I think gave people some leeway for a period of time. But now we're seeing that FDA is starting to cite companies for inadequately written HARP-C programs and things like that. So it looks like the focus is going to start tightening up on that as well.
And one thing, I'll add a little bit about what I'm seeing on the litigation side. And, it's one of those things where it's constantly evolving. I know we've all sort of heard for a number of years now about, be careful to put natural on your food label because obviously that's been a target for a number of years. But what's sort of interesting about that is that's now evolving, and what we're seeing now, we're still seeing natural litigation in the labeling space, but it's changing. And so, for instance, now one of the big targets is malic acid, which originally everyone just sort of assumed was natural and there wasn't a problem with it. But now we have a number of plaintiffs' counsel out in California who are going after products with malic acid in them and saying that's not natural, and pursuing them. And they're having success doing it. So the natural claims have worked somewhat. Another one that we're seeing, and we're just right at the very beginning of this, but we're expecting it to take off, is with a chemical called glyphosate. Does everyone know what glyphosate is? All right, glyphosate is, if you're familiar with Roundup, it's the herbicide. And you probably heard that the makers of Roundup got hit with a really big jury verdict earlier this year. I think it was $289 million. I think they settled maybe last week for, I want to say, $70 to $80 million. This would finish the case, so there's no more appeals. But it was a really big verdict, and all of the plaintiffs' counsel saw that and were like, how can we get a piece of that? So what they started doing is they're going after food companies now, as well as pet food companies, and they are targeting them, saying that they have trace amounts of glyphosate in the food. And there's been 3 or 4 suits thus far, including one that was filed last week. And then I came across this article from just a couple of weeks ago in a local Houston newspaper that I wanted to share with you. And it's a frightening prospect. So I'm going to read this to you real quick. It says, here's the headline, dozens more breakfast foods tested positive for trace amounts of weed killer. The Environmental Working Group found that 26 of the 28 products it tested had levels of weed killer Roundup's main ingredient, glyphosate, that were higher than what their scientists consider protective of children's health. Manufacturers say their products are safe, but the Environmental Working Group report argues that the vast majority of foods tested, such as Honey Nut Cheerios and Quaker Simply Granola oats, have glyphosate levels that might pose a cancer risk with long-term consumption. So that's one to really keep an eye on to see whether that particular kind of litigation has legs or not. A couple of other ones that I'll flag for you real quick. I think everyone's probably familiar with slack fill, which is basically the packaging of food. You see that lots of times with beef jerky, where if you can't see how much is in it, they'll think that it's this big when it's really that big when you look at the packaging. But lots of times if you just turn it over, you can see it. And for a while, it was a really big target. There were all sorts of slack fill suits everywhere, but they're starting to die off. And that's the good news for those in the food and beverage industry. They've had a series of setbacks this year where they've gone after Starbucks, saying that, you said it was 12 ounces of a latte, and I'm getting 10 ounces of latte and 2 ounces of foam, so it's not fair. And the courts have universally, even out in California, said that's ridiculous. So those kinds of suits are just not getting any traction. we are seeing, and I know that this was something that our keynote speaker mentioned a little bit, we're seeing a lot of sugar claims. No added sugar, but not just no added sugar. We're seeing sugar claims along with sort of a health halo effect. So that when you see products that advertise themselves either on the packaging or on the website or in advertising on TV as a cereal that's healthy, part of a healthy, start to your day or something like that, they're suing them, saying, well, how can you be healthy if you have 10 grams of sugar per serving size? Those don't work, and together, and because it has so much sugar, it's necessarily not healthy. And we've seen a lot of those type of lawsuits, and they have had some success. And then the last thing that I'll mention real quick, and this goes back to something that we talked about a minute ago about food fraud. And it's sort of a little bit of a different kind of food fraud. We're seeing folks go after, and this really goes back to sort of the olive oil that you were talking about, Paula, but we've seen it expand out. And so recently there was a court certified a class action against a coffee company that claimed that the coffee was coming from Hawaii in some form or fashion. And it might have just been, and I don't know all the specifics about what exactly they had on the label, but that ultimately the class was certified because with the images on the front package and the name of the brewing company, it led people to believe that the coffee was made in Hawaii when it really wasn't. And we've seen that for years with olive oil, where people may think that it was made in Italy or someplace else. Same thing with beer companies, where beer companies lead you to believe that it was made or imported from Germany when it really wasn't. So those type of sort of quasi-food fraud type cases, we're seeing a lot of those as well. So let me go back, and we have a few more minutes, and ask a couple of additional questions. And Jennifer, let me turn to you and ask you, what areas of the food chain do you see the most opportunity in right now?
I would say right now a lot of it is transportation and logistics. There's been a lot of rising costs related to that, and I've been in a lot of distribution centers that are inefficiently laid out. You've got to reduce your cost, and you've got to make efficiencies wherever you can find them. Routing is a big deal with trucks, and maintaining the cold chain. If you have products that have to maintain a certain temperature, are you ensuring that they stay that temperature throughout the transportation process?
Paula, is there anything you want to add?
No.
Okay. This is something that I know we talked about, and let me direct this question to you, Paula. We talked about it a little bit earlier, but I think it may be helpful to dive on it. And I think we all can agree that it's important to we'll take a look at the food safety team program that a Target may have in place. But how can you assess the strength of the food safety team and program that an entity has?
Well, it really requires someone going in and seeing them face to face and reviewing the food safety plans with them and getting a better understanding of their knowledge of what they're having in place. And then who are their support networks? Are they the only one? Are there others within the organization that have experience? But it's having someone with that food safety background that has experience to go in there and work with them and pretty much like do an in-depth food safety assessment of their team and their programs.
Anything you want to add on that, Jennifer?
Yeah, I'd add on to that. One of the things I've noticed is that you really don't want quality falling under production. That is never a safe thing because they tend to come to loggerheads over what they're going to do with that product. Food safety as opposed to throughput. The other thing is if you look through the programs and they look really good, go out on the floor. Are they being implemented as they're supposed to be? That'll tell you a lot. And what's what's the attitude? When that QA manager walks out on the floor, does everybody greet them? Do the employees know who that person is? Because if they don't, they're never on the floor.
Yeah, that's a great point. And then wrap up for the last question I'll ask, and just maybe a short answer, a short thought that y'all might have. What are some of the best ways to identify regulatory and litigation for a particular product? And maybe I'll start. One of the things that I've seen, and I just, this is something we do a lot of, and one of the things that we like to do from a labeling standpoint is we like to compare competitor products and see what some of the other products have out there. Lots of times it's a gray area exactly what you want to say on a label, but what you don't want to be is an outlier. And if you have a product that's an outlier, and if all the other products in a particular product line, all the competitors, none of them have all natural, but the one that you're looking at does, well, that's a problem. Now, you probably shouldn't be very careful with natural anyway, but I find it very helpful to go and look and compare with other products exactly how, from the labeling claim standpoint, what's on there.
So along with that, I'd like to take a look at, are there other activities in the category that have had a report of some issue in the news or on a regulatory website, and also pull the actual formulations with those ingredients that they're purchasing to make that to compare to their actual product label. They might have had some label developed years ago, and then in the meantime switch suppliers, which caused an ingredient change, which then could lead to a misleading label out in the public.
And just real quick, I've seen a lot of cases where a product is developed and they punch the information into a computer which spits out a nutritional label, and then they just rely on that and never have the product tested once it goes into production, because things can change nutritionally.
Yeah. All right. Well, that will conclude our panel. If there's any questions, yes.
Given the proliferation of class action lawsuits related to labeling claims, during the due diligence process, what are you doing or evaluating to substantiate those claims?
I don't, Trivista doesn't get so much into the label claims, though I know the basics. So if I see all natural or something like that, I can say, probably not a good idea. But in that case, I would hand it over to somebody like McGuire Woods to take over.
I mean, in my case, I would say I'm doing some random tests. I'm looking through the labels of random. If you have hundreds of labels, you can't do them all in a short period of time. But you can take a snapshot by maybe some of the larger and smaller, and send them out for testing to verify they are what they are.
And I think it is helpful to have someone who sort of does this on a day-to-day basis, because they can very quickly tell you is that a problem or it's not. We look at two things really. We look at how many sort of class action lawsuits have been filed. There's a lot of ridiculous ones out there, so that's not the be-all and end-all. We also look at how many get past the motion to dismiss stage. And to us, that's really important, because if you're going to have to go through discovery and do everything, it becomes a problem, even if there's not a whole lot of legitimacy to the claim. If y'all have any other questions, feel free to find us out there, or feel free to contact us, and we'll be happy to help. So that concludes our panel, and I think, are we doing a break now, Brad? Or
all right. There we go. I think we're going to go ahead and get the panel started if that works for everybody. And I know there's a few people out in the hall, and that's totally fine. Folks can filter in as they have a chance. I'm going to do a quick introduction. We're really happy to have so many people here. Appreciate you all being here. And Tim, VG, and Blake, thanks for being here also. Tim Alexander, he's Harris Williams. Tim and I have actually worked together before. Good guy, done a lot of good stuff. Tim, you've been doing this for over 20 years.
That is correct.
Down here from Minneapolis. Recently worked on Slim Fast Sale for Canis, Rise Baking, Ready Pack Foods. And just to show you that things continually come around, today Bojangles, a regional chain in Charlotte, sold again, and that was one that we worked on a few iterations ago.
A couple of iterations ago, that's right.
So thanks, Tim. Blake Wiley, Access Capital. Blake, Access, you formed with another founder, invest in consumer goods, $500,000, $5 million. Currently, you got about 14 brands, right?
That's correct, yes.
Awesome. So Blake's going to be here as our sort of investor and give his perspective. And then VG Sampath with Kiva Global Partners, boutique M&A advisory firm, lower middle market companies. VG's got the international experience, got clients in U.S. and in India, has done deals all over the world, VG. Asia, Australia, Dubai. So thanks for being here. We're excited to have you here. Primarily doing food and beverage ingredients and value-added ag companies. Get that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, awesome.
Across the chain.
Good deal. So we thought we'd just kind of talk real quick about some recent transactions. I just threw out the Bojangles one as an example, but some of the stuff that we've seen, food and beverage M&A continues to progress at a high rate. I know we heard Marty's comments earlier. Some of the things that we've seen, I'm just going to read you all a few headlines. Early June, 10th and Blake Beer Company, that's a craft cider brewer owned by Molson Coors, acquired Clearly Kombucha. Any kombucha drinkers in the house? That's something that is one of the trends we've talked about. Vita Coco was acquired, another one in the beverage space. Beverage M&A, I think we'd all agree, is hot right now, and maybe we'll break off there. Blake?
Sure, yeah, happy to talk about that. When you saw Molson Coors, that was the first alcohol company to acquire a kombucha company. And so you think, okay, what are the, why is that? And to the gentleman's question earlier, you got soda that's declining at 3% a year. You have beer, which is declining at 1% a year. And over here you have kombucha, which is an estimated 23% compounded annual growth rate over the next 5 years. It makes a lot of sense. I think kombucha has some, it's trying to figure out what it is, because it does have trace amounts of alcohol for our due diligence partners that were up here earlier. It's got some labeling things to figure out on if it's labeled as alcohol or not. I know, we let our daughter have little sips of kombucha, so we don't think it's that bad for you. But, when you look at the millennial consumer, and, when I was growing up, Dad would always reach in the fridge and grab a few beers at night. And now the millennial, when they get home, they don't do that. They're reaching for kombucha, because it gives that same kind of flavor profile. It doesn't give you the buzz that alcohol would, but they're replacing it. And so these companies are realizing that. And I think once you see the first acquisition, I think you'll see. Oh, you saw Pepsi bought Kavita for about a 4.5x revenue multiple. I think you'll see AB InBev come into the space and make some acquisitions here pretty soon. And even though soda and beer is an $80 billion category, kombucha is a $1.5 billion category. If it's growing at that 23% and the others are declining at 3%, you can see where it helps gap for a large company.
Okay. And it's interesting. Beverage is a fun space to watch, as Marty said, and we'll come back to that in a minute. A couple other deals that we noted, some of the themes that jump out, McLean Meats, Yorkshire Valley Farms, producers of organic processed meats. Tyson Foods acquired Tecumseh Poultry, organic poultry. So plenty of other deals. I saw another restaurant deal earlier this week. I think it was Logan's Roadhouse, maybe. Is that the one that came out to you today? So let's go to sort of the process. We've got all these deals out in the market. What's working? Who's winning? What's selling? And Tim, maybe we can start with you. I mean, the easy answer is good stuff.
Good stuff is selling. That's for sure. I mean, I think the companies. You kind of take a look at and just think about the the footprint of a grocery store. And what are the growth areas within that? It's the perimeter of the store is where all the growth is and what's driving traffic. So it's your bakery, it's your protein, it's your deli, it's your produce is really what is growing a lot of the perimeter of the store. Within the center of the store, really the only area that is growing is kind of the better for you and the organic. So I think what you're ending up seeing is a lot of strategic acquirers trying to figure out how they can play that perimeter of the store, and those are the deals that we're seeing that are trading for premium multiples. I think the other thing that you're seeing is we talked about some of the functional beverages. To be able to invest in functional beverages doesn't mean that you have to only invest in the brands. A lot of the companies that we're working with, they're trying to figure out how to play other areas of the supply chain, whether it's going to be ingredients or whether it's going to be co-pack. When you've got a lot of small emerging brands, there's a lot of value out there to be a good co-packer for these brands that probably don't have their own capacity. So we're seeing, even like what could have been in years past sleepy areas like private label and co-packers is actually achieving premium multiples these days.
VG, you and I talked a little bit about ingredients, and Tim just mentioned that. What interest level are you seeing in ingredient companies?
Tim is absolutely right. I think when we talk about food ingredients, gone are the days when ingredients meant commodities like spices and pepper and stuff like that. And it's actually a $50 billion market in the global ingredient space. So then you gravitate towards the sensory type ingredients, which were ingredients that better the taste, the flavor, the color, texture of the foods. To now, which is a fast growing segment, is the functional ingredients that have specific health benefits, and not just willy-nilly advertise this is good for you or this is good for joint health or something like that. But these claims are actually being backed up by hard science, even clinical trials, for example. So there are these functional ingredient companies. They spend more on R&D. They have higher profit margins, and naturally they also command higher multiples. And what we are seeing is such functional ingredient companies going as high as 15 times EBITDA. Conventional ingredients would go for 6 to 8 times, and commodity types were like 4 to 6 times. So there is definitely a trend that we're seeing, and that's because of the high growth of in the functional beverages, functional food space, nutraceuticals.
Good deal. Just a reminder to try and talk in the mic. Y'all like these high-falutin mics we got here? Pretty impressive. So let's stick with that ingredients thing for a minute. Who wants to buy ingredients companies? Is it strategic buyers, financial buyers? Who has the interest? Or do y'all notice any difference?
I don't think there's any specific difference. I mean, obviously, many of these companies are small by nature, so initially they're owned by private equity. And then when they sell, it's definitely to strategics. And there are huge strategics in the space globally. Kerry Ingredients, DSM, Frutarome. And these are global players paying, enormous multiples. So exits are very good for functional ingredient companies.
Yeah, we certainly see the large strategics being active in consolidation. I think with the smaller emerging ingredients companies, though, one of the things that they really compete against is on speed to market and being able to develop a product. We were just with an ingredients company a few weeks ago, and they talked about when they're competing against Givaudan and Simris and others that they can get a sample to the client within the course of a few days, whereas a Givaudan, it would be a course of several weeks by the time they can actually get it to market. So that speedership is really important to their competitive advantage, and which is why I think private equity gets very interested in these businesses, because they can see that there'll be a competitive advantage where they can continue to grow the business, but then ultimately an exit to one of the larger strategics, probably at a very premium multiple.
I guess many of them are not able to hear us, so we need to speak up, right? Really? We are getting an echo here. We see.
We'll try to do a little.
Okay.
Nobody take offense. We're just going to look straight down at the microphone, okay? Hopefully my hair looks okay.
Have the speaker.
Financial buyers, strategic buyers. Tim, you and I briefly mentioned that. The multiples are high. Everybody knows that. That's old news. Are the multiples scaring away any category of buyer? Are financial buyers maybe more aggressive than we've seen or expected?
I will say that these days, a financial buyer can beat a strategic buyer straight up. Pay more, provide better terms, better speed and certainty in getting a deal done. There was a transaction I did a couple years ago in the food distribution space, and it went to private equity, and they flat out, they paid a turn higher than the strategic that in theory would have had a lot of synergies. The other thing that the private equity group was able to do is they brought rep and warranty insurance to bear to be able to have the seller with what we call a public company style deal. So there was basically no indemnification post-closing. And that was something that the strategic had a very difficult time being able to offer. So, if you do consider bringing your company to market, don't just think that you're going to the 5 strategics that it should go to, and those are the only guys that you'll talk to. You can often find that a private equity group can outbid a strategic.
Yeah, we're actually working on a deal right now, and exactly that's what's happening. The seller is a privately held, family-owned company, and the deal size is probably going to be around $140 million. And one of the PE buyers, the finalists, has really offered this up as the, in terms of providing, not holding back anything in escrow. And a deal this size, that could mean 10 to 15 million that's going to be held back. And they're offering up a very attractive rep and warranty insurance. And it's going to cost probably $500,000 to $600,000, which will be split between the buyer and the seller. And really what this helps both the buyer and the seller to work together and have a meaningful, reps and warranties, and as opposed to struggling hard to identify every last bit of, what if this happens or what if that happens. And so the closing process gets, it's a faster close. Now, our deal hasn't closed yet, but it's still very early, but we're seeing more and more of the rep and warranty insurance.
And you can take the cost of rep and the warranty insurance and save yourself on legal fees.
Exactly.
Sorry, Brad. But some interesting statistics I was just looking at coming out of our firm, and this would just be specifically Harris Williams deals, that over the last 2 or 3 years, when a financial sponsor is the acquirer, less than 10% of the time are we actually seeing deals kind of done regular way with large escrows for post-closing indemnities. They're almost always now being used for using rep and warranty insurance to either provide a public company style deal or significantly limiting the amount of post-closing indemnifications. When it's a strategic buyer, though, I think we're seeing about a third of the time you're still kind of doing it kind of the old way. And then 2/3 of the time where they're using rep and warranty insurance. So the strategics are still needing to be educated about this product. And, that's where your banker can come in to try to help educate the strategic buyers through the process, introduce them to brokers and whatnot so that they understand this product, and that if they're not offering it, that it's going to put them at a competitive disadvantage when it comes time for final bids.
Blake, when you are going in and looking at a brand, how much sell-side diligence are you seeing or maybe expecting to see? QV, industry reports, any of that kind of stuff.
I think it's important. I think the big trend you're seeing now with Amazon acquiring Whole Foods is, the more a brand, especially an emerging brand, can capture and really create an authentic relationship with the consumer and really capture that consumer. There's a brand out there that a couple people talked to me about called Ugly Water, which has done a great job of marketing this great idea that they'll deliver water directly to you every month, which is no different than Amazon Subscribe and Save, but everybody looks at it like it's this revolutionary breakthrough. But I think these brands, the more they can can do that direct to consumer, kind of cut out the Amazons of the world and kind of keep them at arm's length, I think upon acquisition that revenue's much more. It's much stickier for the acquirer, and it's more valuable than here's just a top line revenue number.
One of the things that we talked about when we did this panel last year was branding. Some of the words were authenticity, real, things like that. So maybe just a quick, run down the list. How important is the brand? And today, is it, a brand that you can touch, or is it an Instagram or social media?
It's extremely important, and you have people don't watch commercials anymore. You don't have to be a $1 billion company to run a commercial to get people's attention. People actually fast forward through commercials. So they're on Instagram, and they want to see. We found that influencers are much more. If it's a very authentic influencer that says, "Oh, by the way, I like this," is much better than Tom Brady saying, "Here, drink my shake." So I think it's very important. It gets them. I think you're seeing it in the election today. Happening right now. You have brands out there, and you have people that have this platform that I'm seeing people show up at the polls and vote today that would normally never vote, probably, but they have that. They can show that I voted. Here's my sticker. I can put it on the Instagram, and they have a megaphone. And so I think it's just like that's happening today. I think it's very important for these emerging brands.
Yeah, I think it can even be for even reinvigorating older brands. So Brad mentioned I just sold Slim Fast for a local private equity group down here called Canos, and we sold it to a Irish company called Glambia. And that was a brand that was literally on its back. Unilever, when it was owned by Unilever, did everything it possibly could do to kill the brand. Canos and some of their partners bought the business, and they had to try to revive it. And what they found was it was not to go through like celebrity endorsements. What they were looking for was authenticity. There was still a group of core users that still really loved the Slim Fast brand, and they got them out as brand ambassadors. And they probably cost, I don't know, $500 a month or something like that to have these folks be brand ambassadors, be on Facebook, write blogs and whatnot. And they were able to use that strategy to help reinvigorate the brand and, triple the size of the business over a very short period of time.
Consumer-generated content, CGC, it's highly valuable.
Yeah, startups are doing that very effectively.
And I'll take it a step further. You can actually look at a brand's Instagram, and most of the time you can correlate revenue and valuation on roughly Instagram followers. Meaning, if you see a brand, you go to the Instagram and they have 100,000 followers, much different than a brand that has 3,000 followers, and you can compare within categories how many followers. Okay, why is this brand that's been around 6 years stuck at 10,000 followers, and this brand that's 8 months old has 80,000 followers? So
Interesting.
But surprisingly, even some of the old brands, I'm dealing with a situation, probably a carve-out from a Fortune 100 CPG company, one of the smaller brands they have, has been around for 80 years or something. There's still a lot of recognition, unaided awareness for these old brands. Surprisingly, that's the flip side of what you guys are saying.
Correlation to followers makes me feel kind of bad. I think I have 12 on my Instagram.
You're not very valuable.
I was doing pretty good. Hit double digits. Blake, you and I talked a little bit about social media with respect to investors. And traditionally, family offices have looked at hard assets like real estate. Today, the independent sponsor model, family office investor, sort of a little bit of a different buyer, maybe, Tim, than what we've seen historically. But you made a good point that I thought was kind of Texas-specific about Texas family offices. Why do you think Texas family offices may look at these deals now?
Because it's exciting for them. They can drive by their commercial real estate and say, I bought that on a 9 cap, and my oil over here is doing this and this is doing that, and that's historically what they've done. But when they can go to Instagram and they can see the brands, when they can go to the grocery store, see it on the shelf, see if the shelf's empty, see if it's full. They can go to their friend's house for a dinner party, open the cupboard, and their brands are sitting there. It's exciting for them, and you see real headlines. You don't see a whole lot of headlines in the traditional hard assets such as real estate, oil and gas. But with the brands, you can touch it and feel it a lot more. And so I think while you're waiting for maybe that exit or that monetization scenario, it's exciting and fun along the way. Yep.
Tim, Fiji, you seeing more a diverse type of buyer?
Yeah, I mean the family offices or what we call long-dated funds, groups that are not doing kind of the traditional 3 to 7 year hold periods, but looking for things that are more like 7 to 15 year hold periods. They have become much more prevalent in the marketplace today, and they're also underwriting lower returns. So that just translates into higher valuations. I think the other thing that we've seen over the last few years is that the family offices have become more sophisticated. They are hiring ex-private equity guys to come in and run their portfolios, and they are just as sophisticated as any private equity group in terms of running themselves through a process.
Good deal. All right. Let's stick with sort of the auction side, maybe pre-LOI stage, and we'll kind of round out that part of the process. What other sticking points, hot button issues, we talked about reps and warranties, insurance, are you guys seeing in the pre-LOI stage?
I think one area is the quality of earnings. I deal with a lot of family-owned companies. They don't have the best records, even though they're clean, the books are clean, but it's not audited, it's reviewed. And a large private equity comes in and they want to do quality of earnings. And they are, they obviously don't want that. By the same token, a deal isn't going to get done if a QOV report isn't published. And then when they hear that if the seller backs out of the deal, the private equity, and I know there's a lot of private equity folks here, they would want that money back, whatever they spent on quality of earnings report by a big four. So I see some hesitancy, they know they have to do it, but they're kind of taken aback by so we are advising some of the smaller clients, you might as well get an audit done before we get into a sale process.
Yeah, and probably different ends of the market. We always advise our clients to get a quality of earnings study, even if they already are audited. That's become pretty much table stakes, at least in the deals that Harris Williams is doing. And both private equity and strategics, frankly, are expecting that. They'll still do their own quality of earnings study as well, but it helps kind of make the process go more efficiently in the back end, and there'll be fewer surprises as you're trying to drive towards a close. But I think that's the thing over the last few years that we've seen very traditionally is that getting people of companies anywhere from 50 million of enterprise value to $1 billion of enterprise value are doing quality of earnings studies.
I think the trend that we keep an eye on is really post acquisition. It's tough for these large companies that do have to report quarterly. I think you'll see more of when they make an acquisition. Let's not get in and find the synergies and slash expenses as fast as we can to get this thing as profitable as possible as soon as possible. I think you'll see a little more, a little slower integration and let that emerging brand continue to stand on its own and let them keep growing, and be who they are before we. And it's tough. It's a push and pull because the acquisition gets the big headline, and then investors immediately want to see how does that affect the bottom line. But I just think that's a trend that we see is that post acquisition will be a little slower integration of that emerging brand into the larger portfolio.
Let's pivot just a little bit, guys, and maybe we'll sort of look forward. So we can get rid of some of the lawyer stuff, LOI, documentation, and just talk about the industry maybe a little bit generally. And let's pick up on something that we heard Marty say, big food acquisitions. So, and Marty, I don't know if you guys had this, but Campbell's, Kellogg's, they have like venture capital arms. And are they showing up at your deals, or are you only seeing them in early stage things?
No, I think we're seeing them some in our deals, deals where there's still is we'll go down and do things of 30 to 70 million of revenue. So we will see them from time to time. Also, like a Whole Foods and their venture arm, we'll see them in some of our deals for some of our smaller, kind of better for you branded companies. So it will depend, because we'll range the spectrum from kind of smaller, fast-growing companies with revenue but no EBITDA to also larger, more stable businesses. So yes, we are seeing that.
Agreed.
Yeah.
One of the things that you've got with these entrepreneurs out there is, trying to borrow your words a little more of a go-getter spirit, more willingness to, I'm doing a very bad job of paraphrasing, but much different than sort of corporate culture. Maybe you get a little bit of fragmentation in the industry when you have these new brands who are coming along. And Blake, are those some of the people that you're looking at and you're finding?
Sure. You're looking for category creators. You're looking for on-trend, high-growth categories that has a strong founder. When we look at founders, we love to look for learners and not knowers. Look for people that are excited, that are that really live their brand. And I know there was a quote when the Honest company got acquired. The acquirer said, basically, if you become more like us, we've failed. But if we become more like you, then this transaction is a success. And so I think you're seeing that kind of risk-taking entrepreneur mindset work its way into maybe the culture a little bit.
Mm-hmm. I think we are actually also seeing with some of the larger strategics when they are buying, especially family-owned businesses, trying to figure out how they can incent the management team like a private equity group. And so, creating kind of phantom stock or kind of programs where they, can be rewarded for growing their business like they would if they still were owners or they're partnering with private equity.
It's hard to do.
Yeah.
It's easily said. Every mature CPG will tell you, this is great. We will buy this entrepreneurial company and we'll leave them alone.
Right.
We'll leave them be what they are. Let me tell you what happened. Okay, the first person that comes in my office, corporate controller, are they SOX compliant? Here we go. Okay. Here's what the advice I give to CPG: you want to buy them, don't tell anybody in your company. Don't give an email address. Don't give the phone number. Don't give anything. Okay? And nobody's done it. Somebody's done it. Tell me. The Kellogg's and Kashi, they moved the headquarters back and forth to California. I don't know how many times.
Yeah.
We tried this with Buy. They were in a warehouse in New Jersey. You walked into a door that was a vending machine. The button was in the change thing. Okay? You get our music and stuff. That's okay. All right? Warehouse space, that's okay. We tried our best. We tried to keep our people out of there. It's gone today. I mean, there are tons of examples. I don't know. I mean, the incentive system is just, that may be the easiest part. These organizations like I work in, like octopus, the tentacles come from every direction. They come back from every direction. Okay?
But it is, for some of the strategics, that is one of their biggest concerns is how am I going to retain this management team and incent them and keep them, and how am I not going to screw this up?
You need a DNA transplant.
It's true. And then for some of these entrepreneurs, maybe they're getting like some pretty big paydays, right? Some of the guys are getting 10, 30, 50, $100 million. The first time they start feeling like they're, becoming more corporate, and they're like, you know what, going to hang out in the Bahamas sounds really good.
Yeah.
And so it's tough to try to retain folks.
So I think it's safe to say we'll continue, though, to see the strategics want to pursue these deals. They will be at the table. We talked a little bit about beverages, functional beverage. I love that word, functional beverage. Another one that I heard you say, VG, was nutraceutical.
Nutraceutical.
Oh,
yes.
I love that one. Nutraceutical.
They've been around. It's just that it's got a bad reputation because of infomercials and people just claiming whatever the heck they wanted. I think the FDA is coming down hard on those, even though they don't have. They all say we are GRAS, generally recognized as safe. So that kind of implies FDA has blessed them. That isn't the case. I know the FDA is coming down hard on where these guys get the products from. Usually it's some foreign country. And first of all, it doesn't do what they advertise that it does. And secondly, the formulations are suspect. So but there are good ones. And like I said, some of them have gone to the extent of doing clinical trials, science-backed, evidence that it, so I think it'll evolve into a much more mature industry, but right now it's all over the place. I mean, there's just literally thousands of nutraceuticals.
Let's take, I know we are standing between everyone and the bar, so we'll end it here. Let's take one rundown, something else in the industry that maybe interests you, you're paying attention to. I do a lot of restaurant deals, menu simplification. Everybody's talks about that. That's been something over the past year. Tim, anything hot button for you right now in the industry? We've covered a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it, what I kind of started with, kind of the whole thing around the perimeter of the store, when I'm looking at, whether a transaction would be interesting for us to represent, if they are hitting that theme, almost regardless of the size of the company, will be, that's something that we would want to be a part of, because we're just seeing that, so much interest in that.
Yeah, we're paying a lot of attention to edible beauty products. Collagen has been a big growth driver. I think also within food and beverage, particularly beverage, you're going to see CBD infused drinks. Which right before I headed over here, I found one online and ordered some to the house. And I think why you'll see it in beverage is people don't get around and socialize over eating half a gummy bear or a fourth of a piece of chocolate. They get around and socialize over cocktails and beverages, and that you'll see these CBD drinks be a big role. That are legal, by the way. For all the attorneys in the room, they're legal.
VG?
Yeah, I see more cross-border deals happening.
Yeah.
U.S. companies going and acquiring companies in Asia someplace, or the other way around. And we are working on this is kind of a smaller deal, but it's a Indian specialty food ingredients company wants to do a joint venture with an American company here, focus more on pet food ingredients. We didn't touch upon that today, but that's another hot
space.
area.
Yes, everybody loves pet anything right now.
More than the kids, I guess.
Yeah.
Yep. You don't have to be food and beverage, even healthcare, because there's no, it's just write a check.
Yeah.
Good deal. Well, thank you, guys. We appreciate it. Hopefully this has been beneficial for everyone. A little bit about what we're seeing in deals and a little bit of a few industry ideas and piggyback a little bit off of our keynote. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.